To date, modern-day pharmaceutical interventions for mood, anxiety, addiction, and trauma have limited efficacy and focus on symptom control. In the natural progression of understanding mental illness, we're seeking interventions that offer healing rather than suppression of symptoms. As such, there's been a steady push in the scientific community to re-explore the utility of psychedelic compounds such as LSD in the treatment of mental health disorders. There's also been a steady push to lift the restrictions, allowing for scientific exploration and potential clinical applications. There's also a growing subculture using retreats, guided trips, and microdosing that has created a budding cultural shift akin to the 60s, leaving the current state of psychedelics equally rooted in science and culture. We have to find a common voice in order to push these interventions to the forefront. Scientists with robust controlled studies, anecdotal trip experiences from people seeking self-development, and everything in between is vital to bridge the gap and keep progressing forward. However, science is essential to establish parameters of safety, clinical efficacy, and to push the shift away from lingering drug propaganda. In order to shine a light on the clinical benefits of substances like LSD, early practices and studies were relatively poorly documented methodologically, and replication in modern studies is needed to move things forward. And contemporary animal studies have consistently demonstrated the antidepressive, anxiolytic, and anti-addictive properties of LSD. And as human studies emerge, we're gaining a better understanding of the safety and efficacy of LSD for the treatment of mental health disorders. However, much more research is needed, especially to parse apart whether its long-term therapeutic effects depend on a direct pharmacological action or on the acute psychological response. LSD remains as one of the most stigmatized and legally restricted agents among psychoactive substances. It's still included in Schedule 1 of the United Nations classification of drugs, restricting its use for research or in research. The traditional assisted therapy entailed a single high dose with the aim of triggering a mystical type experience. Focus on patient preparation was on set, thoughts, mood, and expectation of the subject prior to treatment, and setting, the physical and interpersonal environment in which the subject undergoes treatment, with subsequent follow-up sessions as needed. Psycholytic therapy is a popular format in Europe. It used low, moderate doses, 25 to 200 micrograms, used in more than one therapeutic session, of psychodynamic orientation. In 1963, the trial by Cast and Collins found LSD combined with counseling reduced anxiety, depression, and pain in advanced stage cancer patients. And studies using LSD-assisted therapy came to a halt when it became illegal in 1966, other than a few done in Czechoslovakia, the Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland in the 70s to the 90s. Today, clinicians are still investigating the most effective doses and regimens. Typically, 2 or more sessions with low to moderate doses of LSD are interspersed in a treatment plan with trained therapeutic guides, with regular talk therapy continued as normal in between sessions. The typical format, you've got a consultation to consult, clear of contraindications, and prepare the client. Ingestion is usually oral ingestion of LSD in a controlled setting in the presence of a therapist or guide. Some instances may have people ingest LSD at home due to legal limitations. There's no set standard. Integration, the therapist works with the client to integrate the meaning from the psychedelic experience in follow-up sessions. And currently, this can generally only be done legally in controlled research studies. MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, maintains a database of accredited therapists specializing in psychedelic-assisted therapy. These are accredited therapists, psychologists, and physicians who have undergone additional training in integration therapy. Diverse effects. The psychosensory effects are mainly mediated by activation of the 5-HT2A receptors, with significant modulation by the 5-HT2C and 5-HT1A receptors. These therapeutic interventions become more useful due to the nature of the specific psychological impacts of LSD. Reorganization is characteristic patterns of thinking and organizing information that are common in disorders like depression and PTSD, and addiction as well. LSD-induced disintegration and desegregation. With disintegration, the networks in the brain become less cohesive. A disruption occurs to the way the highways are structured. With desegregation, the systems that specialize for particular functions as the brain develops become different. Change symptoms of unhealthy thought patterns and help patients relearn healthier modes of thinking. Changes in emotional processing include increased empathy and connectedness, which have immediate benefits to well-being and helps patients approach therapeutic intervention with openness. Reduction in fear response, especially helpful for rebuilding trust with the world around them and reducing stress response in disorders such as PTSD. So let's look at the research. There have been relatively few modern clinical trials assessing the efficacy of LSD. The first occurred in Switzerland in 2014 and investigated the effects of 200 micrograms of LSD on anxiety associated with end-of-life diagnoses. All participants in this trial had elevated anxiety, with 6 diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and 7 with major depressive disorder. It's an open-label crossover study, 2 psychotherapy sessions with 200 micrograms of LSD 2 to 3 weeks apart, and 6 non-drug weekly therapy sessions. Therapy style patient-centered and integrative in that current centers of thought as well as childhood and integrated focus on and attended at all times by the therapist or the assistant. The control arm in the study had no improvements until entering the treatment arm, but the sample size was too small to show statistical significance in the study. The default mode network, or DMN, is a series of brain regions that are more active at rest than when doing goal-oriented tasks. Alterations and dysfunction of the DMN are found in disorders like depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, and other mental health conditions. Symptoms of DMN dysfunction can look like anything from impaired self-awareness to negative emotions and rumination. Brain imaging studies have shown that psychedelic states induce positive functional changes in the connections of these brain areas, which has the potential for long-lasting therapeutic effects, especially when combined with therapy. There's increased resting state functional connectivity between visual cortex and a large number of cortical and subcortical brain regions. This study sought to characterize the effects of LSD on emotional processing as a follow-up to the work by Imperial College and Johns Hopkins, which demonstrated that LSD and psilocybin produce sustained positive changes in attitudes, mood, and behaviors, including trust and interconnectedness. The results showed that LSD enhanced emotional empathy and increased prosocial behaviors. It also impaired recognition of sad and fearful faces. This recent study looked at mechanisms of action for the changes observed in emotional processing under the influence of LSD. It's well known that LSD binds to the 5-HT2 receptors. This study revealed the prosocial effects of LSD through activating glutamate, the brain's main excitatory neurotransmitter. The protein complex, mTORC1, is dysregulated in diseases with social deficits, such as autism spectrum disorder, and it's also been implicated in the mechanism of action of other psychedelics, including ketamine. Picture for how LSD psychotherapy works begins to come together with reorganization of brain signaling that involves areas implicated in ruminating thought and other unhealthy thinking patterns. Prosocial behaviors induced in the context of psychotherapy to facilitate a more meaningful patient-therapist relationship and improve outcomes by facilitating processing of negative information. There remain significant gaps in our understanding of the mechanism of action of how LSD-assisted psychotherapy works, and therefore the best approach to optimization. The safety of LSD as a therapy has come along with our understanding of its potential efficacy and mechanisms of action. Historically, several psychological safety issues have previously been mentioned: acute anxiety, acute suicidality, and flashbacks. Implementing proper screening procedures and controlling the set and setting has been shown to reduce risk. The physical properties of LSD also contribute to its safety. It's not addictive in a physical sense, and the side effects observed are dose dependent, allowing for a level of control over the safety. Studies have shown that there are no effects on kidney and liver function at doses up to 200 micrograms. So overall, LSD is considered safe with low risk of adverse events. Moreover, LSD-assisted psychotherapy that induces a mostly positive experience without anxiety is predictive of a positive long-term therapeutic outcome. More modern research is required to better characterize the safety elements of LSD. A recent study looked specifically at safety in a range of doses. LSD produced dose-dependent subjective good drug effects in most participants, with good drug effect rating that were higher than 75% of the scale, maximum in 76% in 81% of the participants at the 100, 200 microgram of LSD doses, respectively. Subjective bad drug effect ratings were comparatively low, with ratings greater than 75% in 7% and 13% of the participants at the 100 and 200 microgram LSD doses, respectively, and lasting no longer than 6 and 8 hours for the 100 and 200 micrograms of LSD doses, respectively. Further investigation into the efficacy and optimization of dosing of LSD in modern clinical trials is required. MindMed recently received FDA approval of an IND for a phase 2b trial of dose optimized treatment of general anxiety disorder. This is a great step in the right direction for LSD, as the study will focus on dose selection and mechanism of action by testing 4 doses of LSD and a placebo in 200 people. There are several other derivatives of LSD that have been investigated recently, included some first discovered by Albert Hofmann. These compounds are in early stages, so there still remains limited information at this time, and we're looking forward to having some new data emerge as these trials get underway and we get some data. Thank you.